I am Madison Miller, 32 years old, and I never thought I would be fighting for my inheritance while still grieving my father. Dad and I were inseparable until Judith came along and slowly built a wall between us. When he died last month, she made sure I missed his funeral. I arrived to empty chairs and cold ashes. Then came the will reading, where she blocked the door with her children. The smirk on her face as she said those words still haunts me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how I wiped that smirk right off her face. Growing up, Dad was my hero. After Mom died from breast cancer when I was 11, it was just the two of us against the world. Richard Miller was not just my father, but my best friend, confidant, and biggest supporter. We developed rituals that kept us connected through my teenage years. Sunday morning pancakes, summer fishing trips to Lake Tahoe, and weekly movie nights where we would alternate choosing films. Dad never missed a single school event, from academic competitions to graduation. He would always say, "Maddie, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Our life changed when I was 22. Dad met Judith Harrison at a charity gala for his company. He was 52 at the time, and Judith was 45, a sleek, sophisticated woman with calculated charm and a strategic mind. I still remember the day he introduced us at our favorite restaurant, Bella Luna. Dad was so nervous, like a teenager bringing home his first girlfriend. I wanted to be supportive despite the warning bells in my head. "Madison, this is Judith. She makes me happier than I have been in a long time," Dad said, his eyes bright with that new relationship glow. I shook her hand and smiled. "Any friend of Dad's is a friend of mine. It is nice to meet you, Judith." From the beginning, Judith was pleasant but distant toward me. Her smiles never reached her eyes, and she would subtly change subjects whenever Dad and I reminisced about our past. Still, I made genuine efforts to welcome her. I invited her shopping, organized brunches, and even asked for her input when planning Dad's birthday surprises. Publicly, she participated. Privately, there was always a polite wall between us. Dad and Judith married after just 8 months of dating. The wedding was lavish and meticulously planned. Nothing like the simple, heartfelt ceremony Dad and Mom had shared in our backyard, according to the photos I treasured. I was the maid of honor, plastering on a smile, while watching Judith firmly plant her flag in our lives. After the wedding, Judith introduced her 2 children from her previous marriage into our family dynamic. Taylor was 24, 1 year younger than I was at the time, and Zachary was 21. Both had the same entitled attitude, as their mother treating our family home like a resort, and Dad like a walking ATM. I would notice how they called him Richard, rather than anything paternal, yet had no problem asking him to pay for graduate school luxury cars and exotic vacations. "Dad, do you not see how they are using you?" I asked him once, after he paid for Taylor's 3rd year of an art history degree she had no intention of completing. Dad sighed, his eyes tired but determined. "Madison, please understand. Judith loves her children just like I love you. I want us to be one family." That was Dad, always the peacekeeper, always seeing the best in people. His kindness was his greatest strength, and ultimately his vulnerability. As founder and CEO of Miller Construction, Dad had built a small family business into a regional powerhouse. Our family home in Scottsdale was worth at least $2 million, and his investment portfolio was substantial. Judith knew exactly what she had married into. As years passed, I built my own life. I graduated with my master's in architecture and joined a prestigious firm in Phoenix, just 30 minutes from the family home. I maintained regular Sunday visits with Dad, though increasingly Judith would schedule urgent family matters that cut our time short. Phone calls were similarly interrupted or monitored. The distance Judith created was subtle enough that when I mentioned it to Dad, she could easily dismiss it as my imagination or jealousy. "Your father and I have our own life now, Madison," she would say with that practiced smile. "You need to understand that things change." What never changed was the gleam in her eyes whenever Dad mentioned business expansions or new investments. I watched over those 10 years as she positioned her children in Dad's company, Taylor in marketing despite her lack of experience, and Zachary in finance despite his history of gambling problems that Dad never knew about. Through it all, I tried to maintain my relationship with Dad, while keeping the peace with my stepfamily, never imagining how quickly everything would unravel. The call came on a Tuesday morning last October. I was in the middle of a client presentation when my phone vibrated repeatedly in my pocket. Excusing myself, I stepped into the hallway to see 6 missed calls from Dad. My heart dropped. He never called more than once, unless it was an emergency. When I called back, his voice was uncharacteristically shaky. "Madison, I need you to come over. The doctor just left. It is not good news, sweetie." I drove straight to their house, running 3 red lights on the way. Dad was sitting alone on the back patio, staring at the desert landscape he had so carefully cultivated. When he turned to me, his eyes were red. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," he said simply. 6 months at best." The world stopped spinning in that moment. I collapsed into the chair beside him and grabbed his hand. We sat in silence for nearly an hour before Judith arrived home from her tennis match. She seemed annoyed to find me there, as if Dad's devastating diagnosis was an inconvenience to her schedule. "Richard, you should be resting," she said, pointedly ignoring my tear-streaked face. "Madison, your father needs peace and quiet right now." That moment set the tone for the nightmare months that followed. Dad began aggressive treatment at Mayo Clinic, and Judith quickly established herself as his primary caregiver and gatekeeper. Suddenly, visiting hours were restricted and scheduled through her. My regular Sunday visits became brief supervised encounters in sterile hospital rooms. Judith says only immediate family during treatment weeks, the nurse would explain apologetically when I would arrive unannounced. "I am his daughter," I would insist, fighting back tears. "Yes, but Mrs. Miller has left specific instructions." 2 months into his treatment, Dad was moved to a private room for more intensive care. I arrived one afternoon to find Taylor and Zachary leaving his room, speaking in hushed tones with their mother in the hallway. "The lake house alone must be worth $1.5 million, Zachary was saying, "and the company valuation." They fell silent when they saw me. Judith quickly composed herself and stepped forward. "Madison, what a surprise. Richard is resting now. Perhaps you should come back tomorrow." I stood my ground. "I took the day off specifically to spend time with Dad. I will be quiet if he is sleeping." Inside his room, Dad was awake, but gaunt, his once robust frame now skeletal. His face brightened when he saw me, and he weakly patted the edge of the bed. "There is my girl," he whispered. "I was just asking for you." I sat with him for hours that day, talking about everything and nothing. As evening approached, he suddenly gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Madison, there are papers in the safe," he said, his eyes unusually clear and focused. "Behind the Sedona painting in my study. Your mother picked that painting, remember?" Before I could ask what he meant, Judith swept in with a doctor in tow. "Richard needs his rest now. You can visit another time, Madison." That night, I received a text from Dad's personal cell. "Love you, Maddie. Always and forever. Please check the safe." I tried calling back immediately, but the phone went straight to voicemail. When I tried again the next morning, Judith answered. "Your father is having a difficult day," she said coolly. "No visitors." This pattern continued for weeks. Dad's condition deteriorated rapidly, and my access to him became increasingly restricted. Whenever I did see him, Judith or one of her children was always present, monitoring our conversations and limiting our time together. During what would be my last visit with Dad, he was heavily medicated, but fought to stay lucid. Judith had stepped out to speak with the doctor, giving us a rare moment alone. "Madison," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "need to tell you, changed things. The painting." Judith returned before he could finish, and he drifted back to sleep. 3 days later, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. It was a nurse from a different hospital. "Is this Madison Miller?" she asked. "Yes, this is she. I am calling regarding your father, Richard Miller. He was transferred to our palliative care unit yesterday." My blood ran cold. Transferred? By whom? Why was I not notified? "His wife made the arrangements," the nurse explained. "I thought you were aware." I drove immediately to the new hospital, only to be told that visitation was restricted to a pre-approved list provided by Judith. My name was not on it. For 3 days I pleaded with hospital administration, called Dad's phone, and even tried to sneak into his room disguised as cleaning staff. Security eventually escorted me from the building. On the 4th day, while sitting in my car, in the hospital parking lot, debating my next move, my phone buzzed with a text from Judith's number. "Richard passed peacefully this morning. Funeral arrangements pending." Not a call. Not even her own words. A text message. My father was gone and I never got to say goodbye. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of grief and disbelief. I called Judith repeatedly, but my calls went unanswered. Finally, on the 3rd try, Taylor picked up. "Mom is busy with funeral arrangements," she said, her voice artificially sympathetic. "The service will be Saturday at 2 in the afternoon at Sunland Memorial. Family is gathering at 11 for a private viewing." Saturday arrived, and I dressed carefully in the black dress Dad had always complimented. "You look just like your mother in that dress," he would say with that proud smile. I arrived at Sunland Memorial at 10:30, clutching a letter I had written to place in his casket, a final goodbye. The parking lot was nearly empty, which struck me as odd. Dad was well known in the community, respected and loved by many. I approached the front desk with growing unease. "I am here for the Richard Miller service," I told the receptionist. She checked her computer and frowned. "The Miller service was this morning at 8. It ended about 30 minutes ago." My knees buckled. "That is impossible. The service is scheduled for 2 this afternoon." The receptionist looked uncomfortable. "I am sorry, but the family requested an early morning service. The cremation is already in process." Cremation. Dad had always said he wanted to be buried next to my mother in the family plot. This could not be happening. In a daze, I walked toward the chapel, hoping to at least see the space where they had said goodbye to my father without me. As I approached, the doors opened, and Judith emerged with Taylor Zachary and about 20 other people, friends, extended family, and business associates I had known my entire life. They were already dressed in muted colors rather than funeral black, clearly heading to some post-service gathering. When Judith saw me, her expression shifted from surprise to cold calculation in an instant. She whispered something to Taylor, who quickly ushered the others toward the parking lot. "Madison," Judith said, approaching me. "What are you doing here?" "The funeral was supposed to be at 2, I managed to say, my voice shaking. "Taylor told me to." Judith's face was a mask of practiced sympathy. "There must have been a misunderstanding. We had to move the service earlier. It was a small private ceremony, immediate family only. Your father would have wanted it that way." "Immediate family," I repeated, gesturing toward the departing guests. "Those are Dad's golf buddies and business partners. I am his daughter." "You had been so emotional lately," Judith replied smoothly. "We thought it would be easier this way, less dramatic for everyone." I stood there, the letter crumpled in my fist as the reality sank in. They had deliberately excluded me from my own father's funeral. I would never see him again, never say goodbye, never place that letter in his hands. "Where is he now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Being cremated, as per his wishes," Judith replied, checking her watch. "We are having a small reception at the house. You are welcome to join if you can compose yourself." I did not go to the reception. Instead, I sat in my car in the funeral home parking lot and broke completely. Hours passed as I sobbed, until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a knock on my window startled me. It was Walter Green, Dad's friend and attorney for over 20 years. "Madison, are you all right?" he asked. his kind face creased with concern. I rolled down the window beyond caring about my appearance. They changed the time, Walter. They made sure I missed it. Walter's expression darkened. I suspected something was wrong when I did not see you this morning. Judith told everyone you were too distraught to attend. He slid into the passenger seat of my car and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Your father asked for you, Madison. In his final days, he asked for you repeatedly. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. Judith told the hospital I was not allowed to visit. She transferred him without telling me. Walter nodded grimly. I was afraid of that. Richard was not himself in those final weeks, but he was lucid enough to express concern that you were not visiting. Judith told him you were too busy with work to come see him. The cruelty of that lie was like a physical blow. I tried every day, Walter. She blocked my calls, had security remove me from the hospital. I believe you, Walter said quietly. There is more. The funeral director mentioned that Judith insisted on cremation despite Richard's written wishes for burial. She claimed there was a recent change of heart, but we sat in silence as the implications settled between us. Then Walter reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a business card. The will reading is scheduled for next Friday at my office, 3 in the afternoon. As Richard's daughter, you should be there regardless of what Judith might say. After Walter left, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. The family plot Dad had purchased decades ago had space for him beside her. Now that space would remain empty, their final reunion thwarted by Judith's machinations. As I placed flowers on my mother's grave, I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. An unmarked envelope. Inside was a single business card. Walter's. On the back, handwritten safe, behind Sedona. Combination is your birthday. The next morning, I called Walter's office determined to understand what was happening. Walter Green's office, his secretary answered. This is Madison Miller. I need to speak with Walter regarding my father's will reading. There was an uncomfortable pause. Let me connect you. Walter's voice was cautious when he came on the line. Madison, I was just about to call you. There has been a development. My stomach tightened. What kind of development? Judith called this morning. She wants to reschedule the will reading again. This is the 3rd postponement. Why I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Walter sighed heavily. She claims she needs more time to gather important documents. But Madison, between us, I am concerned. Your father's will was straightforward. We completed a review just last year. There should be no need for these delays. Do you have a copy of the will? I asked. I have the copy Richard signed in my presence last year, Walter replied carefully. However, Judith is insisting there is a more recent version that supersedes it. She has not produced this document yet, which is why I am postponing the reading. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, mind racing. Dad's cryptic messages about the safe behind the Sedona painting suddenly took on urgent meaning. I needed to see what was in that safe before the will reading. That afternoon, I drove to the family home, hoping to find a moment alone to search Dad's study. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside. Through the front windows, I could see Judith hosting what appeared to be a casual gathering, just 3 weeks after Dad's death. I rang the doorbell, steeling myself for the confrontation. Zachary answered, cocktail in hand. Madison, he said, clearly surprised. What are you doing here? I came to collect some of Dad's personal items, I replied, keeping my voice steady, photos and mementos. Judith appeared behind him wearing a navy dress that looked suspiciously new. Madison, this is not a good time. We have guests. I will not take long, I insisted, stepping forward. I just want a few photos from Dad's study. Judith blocked my path. Richard's study is private. If there are specific items you want, you can submit a request in writing, and we will consider it after the estate is settled. Taylor joined them, forming a human barrier. Mom is right. Nothing can be removed from the house until after the will is read. Legal reasons. I looked past them into the living room, where several people were helping themselves to what appeared to be Dad's prized Scotch collection. My throat tightened with anger. "Those are Dad's things you are giving away," I said, my voice rising. "He is barely cold in his grave." "These are family friends, helping us through a difficult time," Judith replied coldly. "I think you should leave now, Madison. You are clearly still too emotional." As they closed the door in my face, I caught a glimpse of Taylor smirking. I returned to my car, but instead of leaving, I parked down the street and waited. The gathering continued well into the evening, guests departing with gift bags and what looked like small artwork from our family collection. Around midnight, when the house was finally dark, I approached from the back. Years ago, Dad had given me a key to the service entrance. "Always have a way home, Maddie," he had said. I prayed Judith had not changed the locks. The key worked. I slipped inside, navigating the familiar hallways in darkness. Dad's study was locked, but I knew he kept a spare key taped under the antique hallway table, another of our shared secrets. Inside his study, everything appeared undisturbed, as if waiting for him to return. His reading glasses still lay open on his leather blotter, a half-finished crossword puzzle beside them. The Sedona painting hung behind his desk, a vibrant canyon scene my mother had purchased on their honeymoon. With trembling hands, I carefully removed it from the wall to reveal a small wall safe. The combination was indeed my birthday, 0617. The safe swung open with a soft click. Inside were several folders, a small jewelry box, and a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I took everything, carefully replaced the painting, and left the house as silently as I had entered. Back in my apartment, I spread the contents across my dining table. The jewelry box contained Mom's engagement ring and wedding band, pieces I thought had been buried with her. The note inside read, "For Madison when the time is right. Love, Dad." The sealed envelope contained a letter dated just 2 months ago, during the early days of Dad's illness. "My dearest Madison, if you are reading this, then my suspicions were correct, and I did not get the chance to tell you everything face to face. First, know that I love you more than anything in this world. You are my greatest joy and accomplishment. I fear Judith is not who I thought she was. I have discovered concerning financial irregularities in both personal and business accounts. When confronted, her explanations were inconsistent. More troubling is her recent insistence that I update my will to favor her children. She does not know that I have already executed a new will with Gordon Blackwell contact information below. This will supersedes all others and protects your inheritance as well as the company. The original is with Gordon. This copy is for your protection. Trust Walter, but share this only with Gordon for now. I am sorry, Maddie. I should have listened to your concerns years ago. Know that you were right, and I was blinded by wanting companionship in my later years. All my love forever, and always, Dad." The folders contained financial documents showing substantial transfers from Dad's personal accounts to accounts controlled by Judith Taylor and Zachary over the past 6 months. Another folder held a complete copy of Dad's true final will, notarized and witnessed, dated just 3 months ago. A third contained photographs of Judith meeting with an unknown man, time-stamped during the weeks of Dad's hospitalization, along with recorded conversations and bank statements. Dad had been conducting his own investigation before he became too ill to continue. He had suspected Judith was planning something and had created a safeguard, this hidden will and evidence. I called Gordon Blackwell first thing the next morning. He confirmed everything. Dad had come to him privately to draft a new will after discovering Judith's deception. The original was secure in his office safe. We agreed to meet before the will reading to coordinate our approach. As the pieces fell into place, my grief transformed into resolute determination. I would honor Dad's final wishes and expose Judith's manipulation. I spent the next days preparing with Gordon, gathering additional evidence and steeling myself for the confrontation to come. On the morning of the will reading, I dressed carefully in a conservative black suit, not for mourning this time, but for battle. Walter's law office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. I arrived 20 minutes early as planned, and was escorted to a private conference room where Gordon Blackwell was waiting. We reviewed our strategy one final time. Remember, Gordon advised timing is crucial. Let Walter begin the proceedings with the will Judith provided. Only when he asks if there are any questions should you present the true will. I nodded, clutching my leather portfolio containing the documents from Dad's safe. What if Judith tries to claim this will is a forgery? The original in my possession has been properly witnessed and notarized, Gordon assured me. Additionally, your father recorded a video statement explaining his reasons for the changes. Judith cannot override this. At precisely 3, Walter's secretary showed us to the main conference room. Through the glass walls I could see Judith, Taylor, and Zachary already seated, along with 2 people I recognized as Judith's attorney and financial advisor. Their expressions when I walked in with Gordon were a mixture of shock and poorly concealed anger. Madison, Judith said, recovering quickly, "We did not expect you to bring counsel." Gordon Blackwell, he introduced himself, shaking Walter's hand. "I am here to observe on Madison's behalf." Judith's eyes narrowed. "This reading is for beneficiaries named in the will. We are not certain Madison qualifies." Walter looked uncomfortable, but professional. "As Richard's daughter, Madison has a right to be present regardless of the will's contents." Actually, Judith cut in, standing to block my path to the conference table. "This meeting is only for heirs named in the will. And according to the most recent document, Richard and I prepared, Madison has been removed from the inheritance due to her estrangement during his final months." The room fell silent. Walter looked genuinely shocked. "Judith, this is the first I am hearing of Madison being removed from the will." Richard was deeply hurt by her absence. Judith continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He made changes accordingly. I have the updated will here, signed last month." She produced a document from her designer handbag and handed it to Walter. Taylor and Zachary exchanged smug glances. "Perhaps Madison should wait outside while we review the actual inheritance distribution," Judith suggested, not even bothering to hide her triumphant smile. Walter examined the document with a furrowed brow. "This appears to be signed, but—" "It is a forgery," I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. Judith laughed dismissively. "Your father signed this in the presence of 2 witnesses. Are you accusing me of forging your father's signature?" I stepped forward, placing my portfolio on the table. "Yes, that is exactly what I am accusing you of." Walter's eyes widened as I extracted the true will and supporting documents. I handed them to him rather than Judith's attorney. My father executed a new will 3 months ago with Gordon Blackwell as his attorney. He anticipated this exact scenario and left evidence to protect his true wishes. Walter opened the folder, his professional composure slipping as he reviewed the contents. Judith lunged forward to see the documents, her face draining of color as she recognized Dad's signature and the notary seal. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "Richard would never." Mr. Green, Gordon interrupted smoothly. "You will find that this will is properly executed, witnessed, and notarized. Additionally, there is a video recording of Richard explaining his decisions taken the day this will was signed." Walter nodded slowly, comparing the signatures on both documents. The signature on Judith's version does not match Richard's standard signature. This newer will appears authentic. "This is outrageous," Judith's attorney protested. "My client has been acting in good faith, based on her husband's expressed wishes." I placed the second folder on the table. These financial records show systematic transfers from my father's accounts to accounts controlled by Judith, Taylor, and Zachary during his illness. Over $2 million was moved without proper authorization. Judith's face had now turned completely ashen. Richard approved those transfers, for tax purposes. The dates of these transfers coincide with periods when my father was heavily medicated. I continued, my voice growing stronger. "And these photographs show Judith meeting with the notary who supposedly witnessed the will she presented, 2 weeks before the will was allegedly signed." Taylor stood up abruptly. This is a witch hunt. Mom, we should leave. Sit down, Gordon commanded with surprising authority. If you leave now, we will immediately file for an emergency injunction freezing all assets, pending a criminal investigation for fraud and elder abuse. Zachary collapsed back into his chair looking ill. Judith remained standing, her composure cracking. Walter, I said, turning to my father's trusted friend, would you please read the true will? Walter nodded and began to read. The room grew increasingly tense with each provision. First, all attempts to create subsequent wills were explicitly revoked. Second, I was named executor of the estate and majority inheritor, receiving the family home 70% of Dad's investment portfolio and controlling interest in Miller Construction. Third, Judith would receive a modest monthly stipend contingent upon her vacating the family home within 30 days. Fourth, Taylor and Zachary would receive small cash bequests, but no interest in the company or properties. Fifth, and most devastating to Judith, was a trust established for any legal proceedings required to enforce the will, specifically mentioning the possibility of fraud by Judith. As Walter finished reading, Judith sank into her chair, all pretense gone. This cannot be legal, she whispered. We were married. Community property. Your prenuptial agreement specifically outlined what constitutes community property, Gordon interrupted. The family home, the business, and most investments were explicitly excluded. Richard was quite thorough. Taylor turned on her mother. You said this was guaranteed. You said Richard changed everything to protect us. He did, Judith insisted, her voice rising. He promised me. This will is the forgery. Madison manipulated him when he was sick. The video statement addresses that possibility, Gordon replied calmly, producing a tablet. Richard anticipated you might make such claims. He pressed play, and suddenly Dad's face filled the screen. Though clearly ill, his eyes were clear and determined, as he stated his reasons for the new will, his discovery of financial irregularities, and his explicit wish that I take over his company and inheritance. Madison is my daughter, and the rightful heir to everything I have built, Dad said firmly. Judith, if you are watching this, know that I discovered your meetings with Marcus Sheldon while I was in the hospital. I know about the accounts in the Caymans. I know everything. Judith's face crumpled at the mention of Marcus Sheldon, a name I did not recognize but that clearly meant something to her. This meeting is concluded, Walter announced, gathering the documents. I will file the legitimate will with the probate court immediately. Judith, I suggest you consult your attorney about the legal ramifications of presenting a fraudulent will. As the reality of her situation sank in, Judith made one final desperate attempt. On Madison. She said, her voice suddenly soft and pleading. Surely we can come to some arrangement, for your father's sake. He would not want a public spectacle. I looked at the woman who had excluded me from my father's deathbed, denied me the chance to say goodbye at his funeral, and attempted to steal my inheritance. You are right about one thing, I replied calmly. Dad would not want a public spectacle. That is why I am giving you 24 hours to vacate his house before I file criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. The evidence goes to the district attorney tomorrow afternoon, unless you are gone. Judith stared at me with naked hatred, but beneath it was something else. Fear. For the first time she was facing consequences for her actions, and we both knew it. As they gathered their belongings to leave, Zachary paused beside me. I did not know, he said quietly. About the funeral. That was cruel. It was the closest thing to an apology I would receive from any of them. When they were gone, Walter placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Your father would be proud, Madison. You fought for his wishes with the same determination he always admired in you. I nodded the victory, feeling hollow in the wake of my grief. I just wish he were here to see it. He knew, Gordon said kindly. That is why he left such careful instructions. He trusted you to finish what he started. As I left the office that afternoon, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had since his death. The battle was not over. There would be legal proceedings and challenges ahead, but I had honored his final wishes and exposed the truth. That was worth everything. The 24 hours I gave Judith stretched into 48, but true to her survival instincts, she and her children vacated the family home before my deadline. They left it in shocking condition. Empty liquor bottles strewn about, furniture damaged, and several valuable items mysteriously missing. I documented everything with photographs before changing the locks and security codes. Walter helped me file the legitimate will with probate court, and, as expected, Judith immediately contested it. Her attorney filed motions claiming the new will was executed under duress and that Dad lacked mental capacity when he signed it. The judge, however, was unimpressed by these arguments when presented with the medical records showing Dad was fully lucid during that period, along with the video testimony. The court finds the will dated March 15 to be valid and enforceable. Judge Harriman declared after 3 weeks of contentious hearings. The previous will is hereby revoked. Furthermore, the court orders a forensic accounting of all financial transactions made during Richard Miller's illness. This ruling opened the floodgates. The forensic accountants discovered that Judith had been systematically siphoning money from both personal and business accounts for years, small amounts at first growing bolder as Dad's health declined. The total approached $3 million. More shocking was the discovery of life insurance policies Judith had taken out on Dad without his knowledge, with herself as the sole beneficiary. These policies, worth $5 million collectively, had been purchased just 2 months after their wedding. She had been planning his financial exploitation from the beginning. The mysterious Marcus Sheldon turned out to be a financial advisor, specializing in offshore accounts and asset concealment. Email records revealed their plan to move Dad's assets offshore immediately after his death before the will could be probated. Dad had discovered their communication accidentally while using Judith's laptop during a hospital stay. As the evidence mounted, Judith's children turned against her. Taylor was the first to break, approaching me through her attorney with an offer to testify about Judith's forgery scheme in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Mom told us Richard wanted us to have everything Taylor explained during our meeting at Walter's office. She said he promised to change his will, but she was worried Madison would contest it. She asked Zachary and me to witness a blank document that she later filled in with the fake will provisions. Zachary followed suit a week later, providing details about offshore accounts Judith had established in their names without their knowledge. While they were not innocent in the scheme, their cooperation proved invaluable in building the case against Judith. The district attorney filed criminal charges against Judith for forgery, fraud, financial elder abuse, and attempted grand theft. Facing overwhelming evidence and abandoned by her own children, she accepted a plea deal and restitution of all stolen funds, surrender of the fraudulent life insurance claims, and 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. As news of the case spread through Dad's business and social circles, people began reaching out to me with their own stories of Judith's manipulation. Friends who had been told I was too busy to visit Dad in the hospital. Business associates who had received forged emails, supposedly from Dad, changing long-standing arrangements to benefit Judith. Even hospital staff who had been instructed to turn me away while being told Dad did not want to see me. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had systematically isolated my father from everyone who loved him, particularly in his final months when he was most vulnerable. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Through it all, I worked to settle Dad's estate according to his wishes. The family home needed extensive repairs after Judith's vindictive exit, but restoring it became a form of therapy for me, replacing her cold modern touches with the warm, comfortable style Dad had always preferred. In Dad's office, I found additional evidence of his growing suspicions. A journal detailed his confusion about missing funds and his growing concern about Judith's behavior. The last entry, dated just days before his transfer to the second hospital, read, "Tried to call Madison again. Jay says she is too busy. Does not sound like my Maddie. Something is wrong. Must speak with Gordon tomorrow." He had known something was wrong. He had tried to reach me. The knowledge was both heartbreaking and vindicating. Miller Construction faced its own challenges. Judith had installed several loyal employees in key positions, and the transition was turbulent. With my architecture background, I understood the business fundamentally, but needed time to learn the operational details. Dad's longtime project manager, Samuel Reeves, became an invaluable ally. "Your father built this company on integrity and relationships," Samuel told me during a particularly difficult week. "The clients know that. They will stick with us through this transition because they trusted Richard, and now they see those same qualities in you." 6 months after the will reading, I received an unexpected call from Zachary. He was living in Chicago now, working an entry-level position at a marketing firm. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice subdued. "Not just for the will and the money, but for how we treated you all those years. We followed Mom's lead without questioning. I should have seen what she was doing to your relationship with Richard." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Because I found letters Richard wrote to you that Mom never mailed. Monthly letters for years. He thought you were ignoring them, but Mom was intercepting them. I found them when I was helping her move before the trial." The revelation stunned me. Dad had been writing to me regularly, believing I was the one pulling away. Another layer of Judith's cruelty exposed. "I will send them to you," Zachary promised. "You should have them." True to his word, a package arrived the following week, containing dozens of unopened envelopes in Dad's handwriting. Each one detailed his life, his hopes for me, his confusion about our growing distance. The final letter, never mailed, expressed his fear that he would die without reconciling what he perceived as a mysterious estrangement from his beloved daughter. Reading those letters was like having one last conversation with Dad. Painful but healing. He had never stopped loving me, never stopped reaching out, even when he thought I was not responding. Judith's manipulation had been even more comprehensive than I had imagined. 1 year after Dad's death, I stood in the garden of the family home surveying the changes. The desert landscaping Dad had loved so much was thriving again after months of neglect under Judith's care. I had planted a mesquite tree in his memory, a native species that would grow strong in the Arizona sun, just as he had taught me. The legal battles were finally over. Judith was serving her sentence at a minimum security facility. Taylor and Zachary had both testified against their mother and were attempting to rebuild their lives far from Arizona. The financial restitution would never recover everything that was lost, but Dad's estate was secure, and Miller Construction was thriving under my leadership. More importantly, I had found a way to honor Dad's legacy, beyond preserving his material assets. Using a portion of the estate, I established the Richard Miller Memorial Foundation, providing scholarships for young people pursuing careers in construction and architecture, giving others the same opportunity Dad had created for himself, through hard work and determination. The foundation's first project was renovating an outdated community center in the neighborhood where Dad grew up. We dedicated it on what would have been his 63rd birthday, with many of his old friends and colleagues in attendance. It was the memorial service he deserved, but never received, a celebration of his life and impact, rather than the sterile exclusionary funeral Judith had orchestrated. Through the process of rebuilding Dad's company and establishing the foundation, I discovered strengths within myself I never knew existed. The determined girl Dad had always believed in emerged from grief stronger and more resilient. I found myself using phrases he had taught me when addressing the construction teams: measure twice, cut once, and do it right or do it twice. The hardest lesson was learning to trust again. Judith's betrayal had left me suspicious of everyone's motives, particularly in business. I scrutinized contracts obsessively and questioned every financial decision multiple times. It took months of conscious effort to find a balance between Dad's trusting nature and Judith's paranoid suspicion. Walter became a trusted advisor and surrogate father figure during this time. Over lunch one day, he shared wisdom that helped shift my perspective. "Your father was not naive, Madison," he said thoughtfully. "He was optimistic. There is a difference. He chose to see the good in people first, while still being prudent in business. Judith took advantage of his illness and isolation, not his fundamental character." Those words helped me realize I could honor Dad's approach to life without making myself vulnerable to manipulation. I could be cautious without becoming cynical. It was a nuanced balance that Dad himself might have struggled to maintain if our situations were reversed. The unopened letters from Dad became my most treasured possession. I read them in chronological order, one each week, stretching out our final conversation over months. His voice came through so clearly in his written words, his humor, his wisdom, his unwavering love for me. The last letter, written just weeks before his death, contained a paragraph that became my guiding principle. Life will break your heart, Maddie. That is inevitable. But how you respond to that heartbreak defines you. You can become bitter and closed, or you can use that pain to grow more compassionate and determined. I have always admired how you choose the latter path. It is your greatest strength, one I tried to emulate rather than just teach. Dad had seen that quality in me long before I recognized it in myself. Now I was living it, using the pain of his loss and Judith's betrayal to build something meaningful, rather than surrendering to bitterness. As for Judith, I made the conscious decision to release the anger I held toward her. Not for her benefit, she had shown no genuine remorse, but for my own peace. Carrying that hatred was exhausting, and ultimately served no purpose. I would never forget what she did, but I refused to let it define my future. On the anniversary of Dad's death, I visited Mom's grave, bringing flowers for her and placing a small urn containing a portion of Dad's ashes in the plot beside her. Judith had scattered most of his ashes without my knowledge, but the funeral home had, by policy, retained a small portion. At least in this small way, I could fulfill Dad's wish to rest beside my mother. Standing there in the quiet cemetery, I felt a sense of completion. Not closure. I would always miss Dad and mourn the final days we should have shared, but a sense that I had honored his life and legacy to the best of my ability. He would be proud of how I had fought for his wishes and then moved forward with purpose. The sun was setting as I placed my hand on the cool granite of Mom's headstone, now inscribed with Dad's name as well. "I love you both," I whispered. "Always and forever." Life continues to evolve in unexpected ways. The Richard Miller Memorial Foundation is expanding to support vocational training programs across the state. Miller Construction recently won its largest contract ever, and I am finding joy again in small moments. Sunday morning pancakes, that Dad would have loved, fishing trips to Lake Tahoe, where I scatter tiny portions of his ashes in his favorite spots, and quiet evenings in his study, where I sometimes feel his presence most strongly. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you should have been able to trust? How did you find the strength to move forward without letting bitterness consume you? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming life's most difficult challenges. Remember that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose how we respond. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength and healing in whatever battles you may be facing.